Hello everyone, and today is that time where I rank the cast of the season that I covered based on their gameplay in their seasons and how they can either improve, disprove, or how repeatable their traits pertaining to gameplay would be on other seasons. And for this video, I'm going to be discussing the Big Brother 4 cast since I just recently reviewed Big Brother 4, so it's about that time. Unlike the last videos, I'm not going to describe what the tiers are, since I felt like I've done that in the last 20 gameplay tiers rankings that I've done, and it should be pretty self-explanatory by this point in time. So let's just get right to it. At 13th is Scott, obviously. I mean, he was only in the majority alliance because he wasn't considered an X, so that's a positive or a negative. Even with that, it seemed like the Eight were willing to turn on him in the first week, or very soon afterwards, due to his own actions and causing a lot of discomfort in the house, and he didn't react well to Amanda's nomination. He was close to David, Erica, and Jack's side of the house, and that side had most of the weaker players. On the first day of the season, he engaged in a bunch of fights with Amanda, which he instigated and provoked. Of course, the entire house would feel very off about it, and it made them stand out in a negative way. And then he got expelled because his mental health was going downhill. He was throwing chairs around the house, started ranting and raging against production, and a bunch of other stuff. Easy choice here. The final person in the Abysmal tier is Amanda at 12th. It's so clear that she was cast solely because of the X's twist, since she is too normal, calm, cool, and collected to be a typical house guest, in this time or even in future seasons. But I think her being way too calm and kind of not caring about anything didn't help her in the game or the cast whatsoever. It didn't put her in either clique, and it wasn't like she went out of her way to make relationships with people and to form any alliances. We did see herself and Scott arguing on the first day, and I do think that played a part in them standing out in a negative way. I don't know why she was called untrustworthy by Nathan though, that was very odd. In general, she just had no interest in playing the game. She had a feeling she was going to be nominated and knew that she was going home, but never campaigned whatsoever to get the veto used on her or to campaign for the votes so she could stay. Many of the house guests mentioned that she wasn't playing the game, and it made their job in choosing who to keep a lot easier. It's beyond being passive, but just not caring at all. The first person in the bad tier at 11th is Michelle. I didn't put her in the abysmal tier since she was starting to form some relationships, and I do believe the only reason why she went as early as she did was because she was an ex, and the other person nominated besides her wasn't. And if the roles were reversed, I do think Erica would have went home instead of her. From what people mentioned, she was seen as a number for Nathan, and we know she was trying to get in with the girls like Allison and Dana and Juna and whatever, but because she was an ex and wasn't really strategizing, people just discarded her. The others see her as just hanging out on campus or on a recess, and a bunch of girls were jealous of her, and she was seen as the girl around a bunch of women, so that didn't seem to set her up for a lot of success either, and she was clearly out of her league here. When she was on the block, she did absolutely no campaigning while on the block and just held on to people mentioning that she is safe, despite her not having any notable alliances, and took herself being upon really poorly. Maybe if she was more in the game and was better socially, they would have kept her over Erica, but she was expendable to everyone. I believe the producers realized their mistake in casting her since she took it really hard while in the house, while the season was airing, and even after the season finished airing, which is why you won't see any 19-year-olds on the show anymore. The final person in this tier at 10th is Dana. There's no doubt that Dana is a bad Big Brother player, though I do see where she was coming from. Interestingly enough, she was the first one who somewhat intended on floating in the season, as she was in the 8th side of the alliance, but built relationships with people from the Stooge side, especially Justin, where she was intending on manipulating him. The issue is, everyone saw through what she was doing, and she didn't have the tact or skill to manipulate anyone, and she didn't have enough of a social game to pull it off. She thought that with G winning HOH, that she should officially jump ship from the 8th, but she didn't make it known, and she still voted with the alliance, so she kind of burned both sides with this. Her OCD personality and emotional personality was just a lot, and she couldn't be under the radar or play both sides even if she wanted to. And then there was her move to flip, and I actually understand the move. Her alliance of 8 decided that they wanted her to go over Michelle, who wasn't even in their alliance, and they started to heavily distrust her. June told Dana about what was happening, and Dana herself could sense that something was off, so when she won HOH, her beliefs were confirmed when Justin told her that they were all talking about her and plotting her demise. Even though June told her about this and she asked people about it, which pissed her off and caused people to distrust the both of them. The issue is, the Stooges were never here for them forming an alliance of 5 with herself, June, Justin, G, and Robert, though it was ideal, and they were never going to vouch for her, which June told Dana well ahead of time, which is why they should have stayed with the 8. It also made her look jealous when she targeted Allison, since she was showmancing Allison's ex. And then when she was nominated, she campaigned very poorly and kept on trying to guilt trip the Stooges, since one of them wouldn't have been there if she didn't keep them safe, though they can say the same thing about her in week 2, and then acting like she wasn't campaigning when she was. Socially, she was atrocious, and she was extremely flawed at best strategically, though she was pretty good in competitions. I think her flaws as a game player is mainly a personality one, and that is something that cannot really be changed unless there's a lot of self-reflection done, and that doesn't seem to really be Dana's thing. At ninth, and the only person in the potential tier, is David. I don't think he did much wrong in general, despite his early boot in the season. He was of course involved in the 8 alliance, and that clearly happened because they were not exes. It became clear that he bonded with Erica and Jack from the beginning and was on their side with Scott. The issue is, that side of the alliance is easily the weakest one, so it made him stand out a lot more. It seemed like he had a good social game with everyone in the house, as the Stooges liked him and the others in the 8 also liked him. It didn't seem like he was bad strategically, since he planned to dumb himself down, despite the fact that he was in the military. And he was one of the main people who orchestrated the Michelle blindside, despite him wanting to veto her to take out Dana, but that was shot down. But people saw through him pretty quickly. I think if anything, his biggest flaw might have been coming off as erratic and unpredictable at times, and aligning with Erica and Jack, who were just so much weaker, so it gave people more incentive to get rid of him, as he looked so much more of a target in comparison. But apparently he was close to staying, since the Stooges wanted to vote to keep him, and we know that Allison and Erica did vote to keep him, but June shut it down, since David was one of the few people at the time who completely saw through her. He was collateral damage in the mess of Dana, Nathan, and their entanglements with Justin and Allison, since Nathan broke up the alliance even more by saving Allison, and Dana was the first one who officially turned. I have a feeling that he does much better on other seasons, since he wasn't a pre-juror who either did nothing or overplayed their asses out of the house. At 8th place, and the first person on this tier, is Jack. It's interesting watching his edit and hearing what really happened on the feed, since there are some instances that are accurate and other instances are like they're in 2 completely different universes. He was a part of the 8 alliance because he was not an ex, and I do wonder if he would have shared a similar fate to Kent and Jerry, who were ostracized relatively early on in their season despite being in the majority alliance. It did seem like he fit in with his cast better than the other 2 fit with their casts, though the BB4 cast was notably younger than the prior 2 casts. At the same time, he and Erica would just isolate themselves from the cast and talk themselves into whatever alternate universe they were in. But because he was in the FBI and is the most unique male in the house, a lot of his faults were ignored in the edit. Strategically, he was definitely poor for the most part, as because he and Erica were either told information by the others and never got information for themselves, they were often completely off with what was going on in the house and didn't realize how big of targets they were once the early jury portion started. Everyone thought that Jack was throwing all these competitions, but he was really just bad at them, and the only comp he didn't throw was the final 8 veto, which was one of the few competitions that he shouldn't have thrown and should have actively tried to win. While he was right about Justin being the bigger threat than in the Stooges, he got very blinded by this and solely focused on it throughout most of his journey in the house. I also intend to notice that he and Erica were extremely sanctimonious and liked to wag their fingers against the other house guests, like they knew what was going on, and would like to rewrite things based on whatever happened. He was also very close to going home during the 2 times he was on the block before his eviction week. June is the reason why he didn't go home against David the first time, and she, as well as the HOH competition being a non-physical one, was the reason why he didn't go home the second time against Nathan. And I think it was mainly David and Nathan who orchestrated the Michelle blindside, instead of it just being mostly Jack. Socially, he was okay when he wasn't isolating himself and was not involved in the drama, while actually being a jury threat still, and a relatively under-the-radar player. Mediocre at best, hence why he is here. At 7th, the final person in the mediocre tier is Robert. Despite him making it to the final 3, there really is not a whole lot to Robert's game overall. He did align with the Stooges, Justin and G, immediately, and they made it very clear that they were all together, in addition to no one else being able to infiltrate and to join them to be an equal member. This meant that they were a very strong voting bloc and a group of people who would always protect one another, but it also meant that they were very obvious targets who kind of played for one another instead of themselves and saw the game more in a linear way when the game is anything but linear. It caused for a lack of individualism with their games, and Robert was the biggest example of this, as he had the least connections compared to his other allies and solely focused on the Stooges. He was also the least threatening of the trio, which is why he was kept around for so long and eventually outlasted them. But even despite that, he was supposed to be the second person to go over G, and that's mainly because the social game was poor in comparison and he was just very annoying. There was definitely a misogynistic side to him that really pissed off a lot of people and caused for them to not respect him. Apparently, he ranted on the feed about how Lisa and Danielle made it to the final 2 in the end last season and affected a lot of his decisions in the season, like wanting to keep Nathan in the final 8 because June was annoying him, and his infamous rant about the woman after the Jack blindside. Everyone knew that he was the weakest person in the house, and he had no agency or strategic insight in that alliance. Robert also didn't utilize Erica much at all in the season, and compared to how Justin utilized Allison and G utilized June throughout the entire season, it just shows in how inferior he was strategically. And he didn't come to that conclusion that he needed to work with Erica until the very end. He was okay in competition, but the 2 vetoes he won were ones where you work with a bunch of other people, and he was one of the safest people to win those competitions, since he nor his allies were nominated. He stuck to his alliance the entire season and didn't cause too much trouble within this season. Bet became a jury threat once his allies were gone, and because he was more honest than June or Allison, but his game overall is just mediocre at best. So the first person in this tier at 6th is Justin. I entered the rewatch thinking that I would place him higher than the position I'm placing him now, when I would eventually rank the cast based on their gameplay, but I think less of him as a player now after looking into things. He was an X, which put him in a poor position in comparison, so I'll ease off from there. He was able to initiate a deal with Nathan where they, as well as Robert and Allison, would protect one another no matter who won the HOH, so there was some game instinct there. He gets close to G and Robert immediately, and they formed a very close alliance, where he was the clear leader and seemingly the best player of the bunch. Justin was seen as the most competent one, especially because he was the only person in the alliance to have a successful HOH throughout the entire season, though he changed his mind at the end of the week, so was it really that successful? Everyone wanted to target him first, and was clear from the very first week. He knew how devious Allison was and tried warning several people, which is why she ended up on the block during Dana's HOH, since he did not want his ex to mislead more people, though she and other people saw it as a personal move. The Michelle boot was something that definitely stuck with him, since he mentioned it during his nomination as HOH. It woke something up in him to take the game more seriously, and we do see him make a deal with Allison for them to not nominate one another in early jury, though they don't utilize one another as much as they should have, especially in comparison to June and G. He was insistent on keeping June over Dana, when it wasn't the best move for him, as he was solely thinking about the Stooges overall. And it took him a while to realize on his HOH that he should have worked with Nathan and tried to help him stay, but it was a bit too late. And then he didn't campaign whatsoever when he was on the block on his final week. Justin is one of the greatest competitors, just based on him placing extremely high in every single competition he played in, which will help him in any season as a comp beast. And they weren't just physical comps, but mental as well. I think he was the biggest story threat out of everyone in the season, and he was pretty good socially. He has some good instincts strategically, but it's not individualistic whatsoever, and most seasons aren't team based like this one, and is a pretty immovable player overall. Despite that, he has a lot more good qualities than bad qualities, though his threat management is his biggest issue. At fifth is Nathan. I initially envisioned that he would be placed lower on the tier ranking, especially because of the one bad move he made, but I do think he's one of the more well-rounded players from this cast. I do think that him being a single in the season definitely put him in a position that would cause him to relax and to not have the same stressors, just like Dana and Jack, and him winning the first HOH only accelerated it, making a deal with Justin and Robert, which I think might be a first of people making a deal during an HOH comp. Everyone was kissing his butt. He was in the 8 alliance and was close with Dana, Allison, and June in the alliance, while he took out Amanda, who no one cared about. He should have just coasted for weeks off of that. Like Dana, a big issue of his was that he got involved in the exes drama of Allison and Justin, just simply because he was hooking up with Allison, and Jessa was always going to feel a way about it, especially when Allison would trash Nathan to Justin, and she would trash Justin to Nathan, which just increased the hostility between the two of them. He tried to get Dana backdoored in the second week, though he was closer to Michelle and Erica, so I could kind of see where he's coming from with that. But it obviously burned Dana, but she kept him safe still on her HOH because she wanted to work with him. He then destroys his alliance even more when he wins the veto to save Allison, which permanently ices Dana and June off, but also shows to Erica, Jack, and David how expendable they are to him. This was during the era where using the veto was seen as such a villainous thing, and that mentality would end with BB5 when all of them were using vetoes on one another. And it would have been worth it if it wasn't Allison who was out for herself. And the main issue that he had wasn't even the veto usage, but the fact that he spent like over a week just sulking about his move to Allison and trying to get her to like fulfill his emotional need about acknowledging how screwed over he was, or she's making him. But something happened in his final week, and I think it showed more of his skill set than anything. He went up to the Stooges and Justin at several moments throughout the week and made compelling pitches for himself and was willing to flip and was able to eventually get them, which caused him to be extremely close to staying, and his fate was decided by the type of HOH competition it was. Based on where he was positioned in the beginning of the week or in the prior week, that's pretty impressive. If he kept that mindset for his last 2 weeks in the house, instead of whining to Allison, he definitely could have stayed. In general, he is good socially, good competitively, and was decent but messy strategically, and knows how to be individualistic and to make cases for himself, and when to flip on people. But I also think he was cast a bit too soon, where he would have done better in a BB5 to the BB10-ish type of season, where being more cutthroat, being more fast-paced, being less moralistic when it comes to the teams is more admired. At fourth place is Erica. She's a very tough one to assess, and I think she's the toughest one in my opinion. Erica was not doing well socially for the first 2 or so weeks of the season, and she was lucky that she was an original and not an ex. People thought that she was stuck up, and she kept on isolating herself from everyone who wasn't David, Scott, and Jack, and signing with some of them probably did her no help. And a lot of them mentioned that they wanted her out of the house in the first week. This chatter caused for the Stooges to target her on G's HOH in the second week, and while she did do a good job of keeping calm outside of her racist rant, and letting her allies campaign for her, it was mainly because she was an original and not an ex, where I do believe that if the roles were reversed, she would have went home over Michelle. Luckily for her, the messiness that many of the other players of the cast caused her to go under the radar, and one thing that Erica's good at is laying under the radar. Dana, Nathan, Allison, and their foolishness completely blew up the 8 alliance, which caused her target to shrink, though she lost David in the crossfire. She and Jack ended up isolating themselves in their room, and while her takes weren't awful like Jack's in comparison, there was a lot of work that needed to be done. You could tell that she started to mother a lot of the house guests, and that comes with the good and the bad. You come off as preachy and wagging your fingers to people, but it makes people feel comfortable with you, and they know that your compassion will end up helping them out. She's also a bit more individualistic than Jack when she started making pictures that did not include him, and she was becoming more open to working with Robert. I do think that she starts playing well from around the jury phase onwards, especially when she wins the final 7 HOH, since she realizes that there are no more shields and that herself and Jack are being targeted. She makes the simple and easy move of getting Justin out, and improves her relationships with Allison, June, and Robert, which end up paying dividends, and the women see it, which is why they take her out in the final 4. Erica was fine in competitions, was always strategic, which rubbed people the wrong way initially at first, but she generally improved strategically and socially throughout the season. In general, Erica wasn't as messy as the others and became more individualistic as the season went on. The final person in this tier at third is G. I just remembered his catastrophic HOHs, which are definitely huge faults to his game, but outside of that, he is generally an underrated player and was much better than what I initially thought. G did start the game pretty roughly, as he is put on the outs due to being in next and was nominated the first week as the pawn, where it doesn't seem like there's any consideration to take him out here. He then wins HOH, which should have been a good thing, but it doesn't end up being so. I will say that he made a good move in keeping Dana safe when most of the house wanted her gone, as it would cause her to be more loyal to him and his alliance, which pays dividends in the next week. He targets Erica, which most of the house saw as an emotional move because he was close to Robert, but G mentions that everyone wanted Erica gone the week prior. He put up a poor pawn in Michelle, tries to almost threaten David to keep things the same, and has a really huge ego, and he tried to make it seem like he was doing everyone a favor by targeting Erica, which isn't the way to go about this. He didn't read the dynamics, and it caused for Erica to stay. He ends up winning HOH later on in the season, and you would think that he learned from his mistakes, right? Nope. And the second HOH is even worse. Not only does G's target and Erica stays yet again, but he puts the house on peanut butter and jelly so he can secure his future nominations, and in addition to that, he wins the McDonald's prize when most of the house is on peanut butter and jelly, where he could have given it to another house guest and earned goodwill with that house guest. And then he mentioned that he would go on peanut butter and jelly with the house, but continues eating and tries to be sneaky about it. Outside of the long list of his faults that I mentioned about his HOHs, he is a solid player. The entire house generally liked him, outside of Erica's racist rant against him, and his sheer likability caused him to be the most well-positioned in the alliance, in addition to being the most well-respected stooge, as he was seen as the enforcer, which is someone who is very important and smart, but not the outright leader and figurehead. He's the main one to utilize his ex in an efficient manner, as he has a secret alliance with June throughout the entire season, and they do work with one another throughout, unlike Justin and Robert. It also shows that he's a lot more individualistic than his stooges, and we see this when he made a Final Four with June, Jack, and Erica, which was not shown on the show, and did several things to undercut Justin, like throwing the Final 7 HOH and pushing hardcore to Justin about not keeping Nathan, which shows that he is able to get rid of threats that are his allies. G is a player that does better when he is not in direct power than when he is in direct power via winning HOH, especially from a strategic point of view. He definitely knows how to be loyal, but how to be self-interested as well, which is a hard thing for many people to do. He was good in competitions and was one of the biggest jury threats in the entire season, and was also good socially. I do think he has a huge ego when he is in power, and likes to not take accountability for anything. Anyways, he's one of the stronger players of the season, and has most of the skills to be a good or great player, but comes a little short. At second is Allison. Honestly, I was struggling with whether to keep her in this tier or to move her down to the solid tier. I will say that Allison was in a very good position at first. She was in the Alliance of 8, which was done because they're all OGs, and in that grouping, she was close to Dana, June, and extremely close to Nathan. In addition to that, she and Justin were seemingly in a good place and agreed to work together. Everyone saw her as a sweet and innocent girl, but she started to break away from that once she hooked up with Nathan in the first week. One of Allison's biggest strengths in the game is positionality, where she needs to be and knows what she needs to do so she can be in a place where she individually is safe. She let go of the Dana connection, and then there was the drama that involved Justin, and her general messiness her to be on a one-way ticket to being the final pre-juror. Luckily for her, she aligned with someone who was ready to make big moves in Nathan, and he saved her. She would win HOH and then declared that she was going to be a floater in the game, where she got rid of Dana, who was the only person coming after her, and she would bounce back and forth between the power. And she did that first and pretty well throughout the season. The issue is, Allison didn't care about relationship management whatsoever. She should have at least somewhat made amends with Dana before she went to jury, and that's the only person that I believe she could beat in the jury phase, and the entire situation with Nathan was way too cutthroat and unnecessary. Like adding in homophobia just so she could justify leaving him hanging, and I don't know how strategic all this was. Despite everything, Justin still didn't respect her much as a player or a person on his way out. Despite her losing the battle and saving him in his final week, she lost her relationship with Jack very early on in the season, and I don't recall herself and she ever being on good enough terms where they had a good relationship throughout the season. I will say that she improved her relationship with Erica, which is one of the reasons why she kept her over Jack, and things with Robert got pretty bad at the end. A lot of this was due to her flirting mess that happened, and I don't think a lot of that was strategic, and just her personality coming off as emotional caused a lack of respect towards her as a player. Despite that, I do think she outplayed most of the house from a very early portion of the season. She was the only person that was able to either have the veto used on her by someone else or to take herself off the block, and she was really good in competitions, which is a plus for her, and she also knew when to throw competitions as well, so that's also a good thing. I also think she is good strategically, where she knew the dynamics of the house, worked the sides of the house in her favor, and made herself a floater that each side needed as a vote, since there are always bigger fish to fry, and she knew when to let people go in the game. Her gameplay really evolved how Big Brother's strategy is implemented as a whole and really drove a lot of the season, which is why she's here, but she just rubs a lot of people the wrong way, tends to play the victim when people try to call her out on it, and I don't think she fully grasped why people felt the way they did about her. And at first place is none other than June. I've said this for a few people, but I'm pretty unsure about whether I should put her on this tier or not, or another tier. She also had the benefit of being an original like all the other 7 who had the same advantage, which caused them to form an immediate alliance. Unlike most of them, she quickly realized that she could use the twist to her advantage, which she did when she aligned with G, and they kept true to it for most of the season. And it did them both very well, as they had information that many people that they were aligned with didn't have. She got close with the Nathan, Allison, and especially Dana side of the 8, and that was where most of the active players in the alliance were. People all over the house were giving her information, and she was able to also see where everyone was since she cooked a lot, and the kitchen gave access to where a lot of the conversations in the house were happening in many of the different spaces. She knew that Dana was in trouble, so she tried to help Dana out several times, but eventually realized that Dana is too much of a liability and her game will not improve until she left the house. It seemed like after Dana left and seeing Allison start to float, June started doing it herself and definitely kicked things up a notch. The Stooges still thought she was with them, and she somewhat was, and she built better relationships with Jack and Erica, and was able to keep the Stooges under control, and her building all these relationships benefited her throughout the next several weeks. I forgot about the amount of time she was able to keep the Stooges under control, where she was the one who stopped them from saving David, and she was the one who stopped them from saving Nathan as well, though that was partially because she got very sloppy with her flipping sides that specific week. For some reason, the Stooges never even considered to approach her about voting to evict Erica during the Jack boot week, when June had the better relationship with Jack and was able to cleanly slit G's throat when she was HOH and neutralized Allison's power during that week as well. She also threw most of the endgame competitions so Allison could be the big bad enemy. The big thing with June is that she cannot beat most of the people in the jury, and that was because of the way she talked about people and floated. At the same time, she was very aware of this and took the person to the end that she knew that she could beat. June was able to explain her strategy extremely well, mentioned how everything she did was intentional, and she really did cut people with a cleanness and grace that Allison just did not have. She could win a comp here and there, and she could throw a comp as well, was impressive strategically, and was good enough socially, though it definitely could have been better. Her game has aged extremely well, it's pretty repeatable, and many people have played similarly to her and did it well as well. So that is my Game Player Tiers ranking on the Big Brother forecast, and it's definitely interesting since you do start to see the fact that they've had a few seasons as a reference point. A lot of them were starting to adapt, though a lot of them are still affected by the obsessive need of loyalty, morality, and all that stuff. And the people who tended to have a bit more agency and individuality and flexibility were the ones who generally started to rank higher on my list. It'll be interesting to look at Big Brother 5 since I believe that was the season where they fully embraced that it was a game and you're allowed to make cut-throat moves, and the morality sense of it was completely gone by this time. Not only just in Big Brother, but this time in Survivor as well. So I'm definitely looking forward to it. Thank you all for watching. Like the video, subscribe, do all that jazz, and I'll be back with something soon. Bye!